You ready? Good. All right. Are we ready? Yes.
Call my wife out.
Call what?
Call my wife out.
Call Holly out.
Oh.
Very good.
Hey, you could use one of those truck phones.
I know you all want to leave on time today. All right, we're continuing in John. We're actually going into another event in John chapter 7. Remember last week, Jesus was using metaphors. He's using figures of speech to refer to himself as, to try to teach those Jews that believe so heavily in the law of Moses as their salvation, or believe so heavily that they were sons of Abraham as their salvation. He's trying to teach them to let go of that idea and believe on me, that is Jesus. Jesus is trying to tell them to believe on me and let go of these other traditions that you have. And it's you think about, the Jews had to believe on Jesus. In fact, the Ethiopian eunuch, if thou believest, thou mayest. I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And Jesus asked the disciples, who do men say that I am? And they tell him, some say John the Baptist, some say one of the prophets, Jeremiah, Elijah, one of the prophets. And he said, who do you say that I am? Of course, Peter spoke up and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. So it is essential, not only for the Jews to have believed in God and that Jesus is the Son of God, but also anyone else who would be saved. The Gentiles are required to confess Jesus Christ as the Son of God as well. And so, because of the teaching he was using himself as that he is the bread of life, relating as they were discussing the manna that came down out of heaven. Jesus said, Moses didn't give you the manna, give them the manna. It was God, of course, that gave them the manna to eat. And they died. He made the point. They died. But me, I'm the bread that God delivers to you now, and I'm the bread of life that you have everlasting life in me. Well, that's one figure. Then he went on to talk about his flesh. He would give his flesh. Of course, we can look at that as he was going to be crucified on the cross. He was going to give his life for them. And so he talked about that that except you eat my flesh and drink my blood. Of course, we understand this is a figure. He doesn't mean literally, but unless you learn of me and believe on me, you'll not find everlasting life. And so the kind of language he was using, sort of like some of the Jews were saying, "Ugh, what is this? How is it we can eat his flesh and drink his blood?" They were stuck at the physical. They didn't realize, and he said so. In verse 62 and 63 of chapter 6, he says, what? And if ye shall see the Son of Man ascend up where he was before? What are you going to do if you see me go back to heaven as where I was before? Verse 63, it is the Spirit that quickeneth, the flesh profiteth nothing. What I'm teaching you, as he goes on to say, the words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. So I'm not talking about material things here. I'm talking about spirit. I'm talking about spiritual matters, and that brings eternal life. Not the bread that they ate in the wilderness, but I'm the bread that if you eat of me, you'll have everlasting life. So these things he was saying, as we see in verse 66, from that time many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. So it really turned a lot of people off from him, because he was trying to teach them, you got to believe in me. And he asked his disciples, will you also go away? But what did Simon Peter say? Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? You have the words of life. And so with that teaching, we'll understand why the Jews, part of the reason why the Jews were they wanted to kill him. They thought his teachings were out of this world. They're just unbelievable. In fact, some thought they were perverse. But it wasn't that his teachings were perverse or unbelievable, it's that they weren't receiving it correctly. They weren't looking at the spiritual application. And he told them, as he said in verse 63, it's the Spirit that quickeneth. I speak unto you, the words I speak unto you, they're spirit, they are life. So, So now we see about 6 months later after this event, it says in verse 1 of chapter 7, after these things Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry, because the Jews sought to kill him. Now that Jewry, he didn't walk in Judea. Does another version say Judea? Okay. New King James and the American Standard, I think, says Judea. So he wouldn't walk in Judea because the Jews sought to kill him. So it was already there. The time was already there. They were trying to kill him. And he knew it. And whereas the Judea down in the southern part of the nation, where Jerusalem was the capital, that's where all the big wigs hung out. Okay, it's like going to Washington D.C. That's where all the big wigs are. That's where or going to Austin, And so, knowing that they were seeking to kill him, he stayed in the north in Galilee. Okay, and incidentally, the tense of the verbs here are not accurate in the King James Version. He says, for he was not walking in Judea because the Jews sought to kill him. So he was walking in Galilee. It's what they call the imperfect tense. It hasn't been completed. It was an activity that had not been completed. So he was continuing to walk in Galilee and continuing not to walk in Judea. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. Now, so this is about 6 months after the events that John just wrote about in chapter 6. There are other events that took place between this and between the end of chapter 6 and chapter 7. We can see in the Matthew and Luke and Mark, the other gospel accounts about the events. But for John's purpose, he's establishing the fact they wanted to kill him, and this is why. Okay, the Jews did not accept what Jesus was teaching, particularly that he's the Son of God. They knew what he was teaching. They knew what he was claiming, that he's the Son of God, and that was one of the reasons they wanted to kill him. It was blasphemy to them. And so after we see here, and we see in the latter part, verse 1, because the Jews sought to kill him. It wasn't every Jew that wanted to kill him. Jesus was a Jew. All his disciples were Jews. Everyone he was teaching to were Jews, typically Jews. So it wasn't every Jew that's trying to kill him, but John is relating this fact. Remember, this was written far long after the events. Some put the writing of the gospel account of John in about the mid-90s, about 96, 97, 98, somewhere around there. They look at it as he probably wrote it toward the end of his life from Ephesus. And so when you consider that by this time you had the believers, the church, they were called Christians. And then there was the Jews that didn't believe. Okay, so there was a distinction that John was making between the Jews of his day and those believing Jews who had become Christians. That's the way, just a manner of speaking that was convenient and easily understood. So as the Jews, talk about those unbelieving Jews sought to kill him. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. There were 3 major feasts that they had once a year, and all the men were required to go up to Jerusalem to participate in these feasts. Now, we have seen where the Passovers, Jesus had been to Jerusalem on the Passovers. In fact, the last Passover, he's going to remind them about the events that took place there and why they had such a problem understanding him. But why they had such contention with him. Now, so the Feast of Tabernacles was different from the Passover. It was more positive. It was more of a real celebration. It was commemorating the years and remembering the years that Israel wandered in the wilderness and what they live in when they were wandering in the wilderness. What they carry around with them wherever they went, and what they wrecked every place they stopped. Tents. They lived in tents, tabernacles. They lived in booths. Just different ways of referring to the same kind of. They just picked up their tent, folded it up, and went on. And so this Feast of Tabernacles was to recall that period of time, and furthermore, it's also referred to as the Feast of uh, referring to the harvest. First, having to do with the harvest time was about this time. So that it was a reference to, I'll think of it in a minute, the term they used for it. But it was and that kind of a celebration was not atypical, even in America's early days. And all around the world, you had various cultures who would have these celebrations because of the good harvest. Here they are having all this. They've been prepared for the winter that was coming up. And so it was a joyous occasion. Our own Thanksgiving, really, when we talk about our own American Thanksgiving, it was established and observed around the days of that most cultures would have observations of Thanksgiving and celebration because of the harvest. So this Feast of Tabernacles happening around that time, it was more of a festive occasion. In fact, some of the Psalms that were written, what they call Psalms of Ascension. That means, when they would go to Jerusalem, they would actually, literally ascend up to Jerusalem because the elevation of Jerusalem was like about 1,291 feet, to be a vague number here.
I'm trying to get my internet to pull up the other feed.
Okay. It was the
It was at the end, it was the Feast of Weeks. It was at the beginning, there was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, there was the Feast of First Fruits, and the Feast of Weeks.
It wasn't the Feast of Weeks. It was the Feast of not intaking, ingathering. The Feast of Ingathering. Okay, so it was around the harvest time. Actually, if you look, it was in the month of Tishri, I think it is, which occurs right around the last 2 weeks of September and the first 2 weeks of October. That's about the harvest time. Okay.
That was Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets, the first day of that month.
I'm sorry?
The one that took place in Tishri was the Feast of Trumpets.
Trumpets? Okay, I'm not familiar with that. Didn't look into that, but okay.
Those other three were right before that. It was the Passover, the Unleavened, First Fruits, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement.
Okay. So I think, this is the Feast of Tabernacles, and commemorating the wandering in the wilderness in their tents. But also, I think it's the Feast of Ingathering because it occurred during the harvest, or right before it.
Feast of Tabernacles mentioned multiple times in Scripture, sometimes called the Feast of the Ingathering, the Feast of the Lord, or the Feast of Booths. Exodus 23:16, Deuteronomy 16:14.
Okay. Okay. So this was one of the different feasts. It wasn't the Passover, but this is a different feast. Okay, so there he was. Okay, but so it was coming. It was at hand. It was about to come. We can see Leviticus 23:34 speaks about the Feast of Tabernacles. Now listen, verse 3. His brethren, speaking about his blood kin, his physical relations, his brothers and sisters, therefore said unto him, Depart hence, and go into Judea, that thy disciples also may see the works that thou doest. Whatever their concern was, it's thought that perhaps the way it was said, that they didn't really believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that they weren't convinced, whether they had not seen any of his miracles performed, or whether they had and it was not sufficient for them to believe that he's the Messiah, that he's the Son of God. But whatever reason, it looks like they don't believe that he is who he says he is, just like many of the other Jews. You remember when Jesus went to read in the synagogue, and he read the prophecy and when he finished reading it out of Isaiah, he said, "This day you've seen it fulfilled." And they were wondering, what about all these eloquent words? And yet who's he talking about? Is he talking about himself? And we know him. We grew up with him. We know his father and his mother, Joseph and Mary and his brothers and sisters. We all know him. So is he talking about himself or what? And so basically Jesus said, prophet's he's not given his due credit while he's at home. And so your own brothers and sisters probably did not even see who he was. Even today, many people who obey the gospel, become Christians, and they come out of whether they come out of a denominational world or whether they come out of a world with no religion. Usually, family are the ones that don't understand, and if one is wanting to be involved, wanting to be zealous, and is dedicating time to learning and being with the brethren, all of a sudden his whole world's changed. And his brothers and sisters who are not used to this, say his whole world's turning upside down. And so they don't see the value of what he's found and the importance of what he's found, and so their support is not behind him. In fact, more likely, they would criticize him for making such a radical change in his life, and said, "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" And so it is that families are probably, if you're converted out of a family, a non-believing family or a denominational family, they are the ones that understand the least. Okay. And so it was with Jesus, his being the Messiah, the Son of God. It seems likely that they would not believe that he is the Messiah at this point. Now later on, it's true. James, the book of James, was written by, he's the half-brother of Jesus. Okay. So as they say, and some could also imagine, hey, this is almost said in a mocking way. And it's sort of like, yeah, go ahead and go on down there. At least let your disciples see what you really do, Sort of like, oh, yeah, right, okay. And so they say, go down there that they can see your works. In other words, advertise, promote yourself, let everybody see what you're really all about. Well, and they go on to say, for there is no man that doeth anything in secret, and he himself seeketh to be known openly. If thou do these things, show thyself to the world. Don't just hide it all down. Show everybody. It's like, what he says, like, if you really are who you say you are, go show us. Go show them. Don't deprive your disciples. Become renowned if that's what you want to do. Well, that wasn't Jesus' motivation. He was not motivated. See, they were looking at worldly aspects of self-promotion. And Jesus was not motivated by any of this. And he implies that in his answer to them. In verse 5, for neither did his brethren believe in him. So they didn't believe in him. Okay. Then Jesus said unto them, my time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. Notice he didn't lash out at them. Rather, he just calmly explained, my time's not now, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but me it hateth, because I testify of it that the works thereof are evil. So he's explaining to them why he can't just go down there any time. The world hates me. And he knew they were trying to kill him. He didn't say that to his brothers and sisters, but he did say they hate him because he testifies that the works of the world are evil. And he suggested to them, go ye up into this feast. I go not up yet into this feast, for my time is not yet full come. By this answer, some look at it and say Jesus was deceiving his brothers and sisters, fully intending to go up to Jerusalem. Who he was intending, we'll see that in a moment. But the fact that he deceived them isn't so, because by the time go ye up to the feast, I go not up yet into the feast. In other words, I'm not going to go just now. You go on ahead. I'm not going to go just now. Okay.
She wanted him to help at the feast. He told her, my time hasn't yet come.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no deception there. He did what she asked him to do.
Yeah.
He still made it clear that, he had in his own time.
Right.
He would do
Right.
what was necessary.
He was in control.
Right. In chapter 12, he said the time is now.
Yeah.
So it just shows he was in control.
Right. In spite of it seeming like he gave him, even when he was before Pilate, he didn't lose control. It was given to Pilate that was the time, and everything was unfolding into the prophecies, to the intentions. But
The text talking about the fact that they sought to kill him in verse 1. And then he said, my time